2019, rural Ontario. You bought land because you wanted freedom, not luxury, not extravagance, just the right to live without someone watching. You imagined a cabin, a wood stove, a solar rig humming in the silence. You figured, it's Canada. If I own the land, I can live on it. Yeah. That fantasy lasted exactly 22 days, because that's when the township inspector rolled up holding O. Regent 33212, Part 8 of the Ontario Building Code, like it was a warrant. He looked at your solar panels, your composting toilet, your unregistered greywater trench, and slapped a stop work order on your dream. You can't occupy this dwelling until you achieve compliance. Translation: you don't own this land. You lease your freedom from the province in annual inspections, August. And here's the part nobody warns you about. 5 provinces are making damn sure off-grid living becomes legally, financially, and psychologically impossible. You're the kind of person who believes autonomy is earned, not granted. You buy land. You build with your own hands. You install your own power. That's supposed to be freedom. That's what they taught you freedom was. But in Ontario, freedom is conditional on a stack of permits. Because under the Ontario Building Code, you need a permit for everything: foundation, plumbing, structural framing, electrical, energy performance, even your septic before you can legally sleep in the building you constructed. And if you think inspectors don't check rural cabins, ask anyone in Lanark, Hastings, Renfrew, Muskoka. They absolutely do. In 2021, a Lanark County couple was denied occupancy because their solar system wasn't grid-tied. They had power. They had heat. The house worked. But the township said the system was not recognized under ESA compliance, so the home was declared uninhabitable. Let's do the math. Land, $22,000. Permit package, $4,500. Septic engineering, $2,500. Septic install, $18,000 to $32,000. ESA inspections, $200 to $400. You're already $50,000 deep before you build a wall. They call it minimum standards, and they mean prove your autonomy to us or it's illegal. And this is the lightest province in the video. The inspector who delivered that stop work order drives 80 kilometers each way for site visits. His travel time gets billed to the township, which passes the cost to you through permit fees. The system feeds itself. Every inspection creates justification for the next fee increase. You thought you were building a cabin. You were actually funding a regulatory ecosystem that exists solely to regulate you. You think if you disappear into the forest in British Columbia, maybe the Kootenays, maybe the Sunshine Coast, nobody will care. But BC doesn't run on invisibility. BC runs on energy compliance paperwork. In 2017, the province introduced the BC Energy Step Code, a mandatory system for reaching net zero performance by 2032. Sounds nice on a brochure, but in real life, Step Code requires air tightness tests, energy modeling, performance metrics measured against grid baselines. Even if you're off-grid, even if you don't have a grid tie. In 2021, a Sunshine Coast builder had a fully functional off-grid cabin, solar, wood heat, composting toilet, but could not get occupancy because he couldn't provide a licensed energy advisor's Step Code report. He wasn't unsafe. He was just unmodeled. Energy advisor, $1,800, blower door test, $450, retest, $600, travel surcharge, $450, total almost $3,500 for someone to tell you that your solar cabin doesn't fit a suburban computer model. They call it climate leadership. They mean pay consultants or get out. Here's what the Step Code actually requires: thermal envelope calculations, mechanical system efficiency ratings, air tightness targets measured in air changes per hour, and final performance verification that compares your energy use to a theoretical model, except when you're off-grid. There is no theoretical model. The software wasn't designed for solar batteries and wood stoves, so the energy advisor creates custom inputs at $300 an hour to argue with software about whether your lifestyle is acceptable. The cabin worked before he showed up. It'll work after he leaves, but without his signature, you're a squatter on your own land. Alberta sells itself as the free province, the do-what-you-want on your own land province, except the actual rulebook says otherwise. Under the Alberta Safety Codes Act, You need electrical permits, plumbing permits, gas permits, building permits, and all electrical work must be signed off by a master electrician. No sign-off equals no energization. No energization equals no occupancy. In 2020, Parkland County fined a man building an off-grid cabin without permits. His solar system worked. His composting toilet worked. The county didn't care. They labeled the structure unsafe strictly because it lacked approved inspections, not because of hazards. Permit set, $1,200. Electrician sign-off, $450. Reinspection if they don't like your wiring, $150. They say safety compliance. They mean your DIY work will never be accepted. The master electrician requirement is where Alberta's system shows its teeth. You can wire a cabin perfectly to code. You can follow every regulation in the Canadian Electrical Code. Doesn't matter. Unless a master electrician inspects and signs off, the electrical system legally doesn't exist. And most master electricians won't sign off on work they didn't do themselves. Liability insurance, professional standards, which means you're not just paying for an inspection, you're paying for a complete reinstall by someone whose hourly rate is triple what you make. The county calls this ensuring public safety. You call it a protection racket for the trades. Either way, your cabin sits dark while you scramble for money you don't have. Now let's get to the 5 provinces putting the screws in the deepest. Ontario positions itself as orderly, responsible, middle of the road. But when it comes to off-grid living, Ontario is an outright chokehold. Ontario Building Code Part 8 requires full septic approval for occupancy. OBC 9.36 means energy efficiency rules apply even to small rural houses. The Electrical Safety Authority mandates certification and inspection. In 2021, that Lanark couple refused grid tie-in. The township refused occupancy. Their solar system provided power, but ESA would not certify it without engineered documentation. They lived in their driveway for months. Economic breakdown. Septic, $18,000 to $32,000. Well, $10,000 to $20,000. ESA inspections, $200 to $400. Energy compliance, $500 to $1,500. A $22,000 plot of land requires nearly $65,000 of compliance before you can legally stay overnight. They say protecting the environment. They mean pay the gatekeepers. But let's break down what septic approval actually means in Ontario. First, you need a site evaluation by a licensed engineer. That's $1,200 to $1,800. Then soil testing to determine percolation rates. Another $600 to $800. Then engineered drawings for system design, $2,500 minimum. Then installation by a licensed contractor because owner installation isn't recognized, $18,000 to $32,000 depending on soil conditions. Then final inspection from the local health unit, $250. And if your soil fails the percolation test, you need an engineered tertiary treatment system. That's $40,000 to $70,000 for a system that does exactly what your composting toilet was doing for free. The regulation exists officially to protect groundwater. But the outcome is making rural land ownership impossible for anyone without contractor money. While Ontario buried homeowners in paperwork, British Columbia took a different approach. BC doesn't hide its ideology. They tell you straight up net zero by 2032, but the BC Energy Step Code turns off-grid living into a consultant playground. Key requirements: energy advisor reports, air tightness tests, engineered septic design, mandatory inspections in many jurisdictions. A small Okanagan cabin was demolished in 2019 after repeated non-compliance orders because its builder couldn't pay for step code modeling plus engineered wastewater system. Not unsafe, just unpermitted. Step code modeling, $2,000 to $3,500. Septic engineering, $20,000. Grid connection if forced, $12,000 to $60,000. They say sustainable future. They mean your choices aren't allowed. And here's the kicker. While BC brands itself as environmentally progressive, the actual effect is making rural self-sufficiency financially impossible for anyone without consultant money. The BC system operates on a step scale from 1 to 5. Most municipalities now require Step 3 minimum for new construction. Step 3 requires air tightness testing showing 2.5 air changes per hour at 50 pascals of pressure. If you don't know what that means, you're normal. But you still have to pay someone who does. And when your off-grid cabin uses natural ventilation instead of mechanical systems, hitting that target becomes absurd. You're being measured against metrics designed for suburban heat pumps. Your wood stove and operable windows don't compute. So you fail, not because the cabin doesn't work, but because it doesn't work the way the code expects. Translation: your solutions aren't pre-approved, so they're not solutions, but Quebec takes licensing requirements to a whole different level. Quebec loves independence culturally, but if you want independence from the grid, good luck. Under the Régie du Bâtiment du Québec, all electrical work must be done by a licensed electrician. All plumbing must be certified. All buildings must follow the Quebec Construction Code. DIY. Electrical is literally illegal. In 2020, a Laurentides couple was denied occupancy because their off-grid solar wasn't installed by a licensed electrician. It worked. It passed a private safety inspection. Didn't matter. Licensed electrician install 8 to 25,000, engineered letters 2,500 plus, inspections 2 to 600, DIY solar kit costs 3,000, legal compliance costs 16,000. They say public safety, they mean protecting the trades. Translation: your autonomy must be filtered through union labor rates, whether it makes sense or not. Quebec adds another layer: language requirements for all permit applications and technical documentation. If your solar system manual is in English only, you need certified translations. If your engineer is from Ontario and provides documentation in English, same problem. Translation costs 3 to 500, but they add friction, delay. Another reason to give up and connect to Hydro-Québec, which is the point. The system doesn't have to stop you directly. It just makes every step slightly more expensive, slightly more complicated, slightly more humiliating than you're willing to tolerate. Eventually you break. Eventually you comply. And the province adds another ratepayer to the grid, Alberta. Markets freedom. But the Safety Codes Act is one of the strictest enforcement frameworks in the country. In 2022, Lac-Saint-Anne County shut down an off-grid tiny home community over missing permits. 0 injuries, 0 hazards, just non-compliance. Master electrician signature, $450. Septic engineering, $2,200. Permit stack, $700 to $1,500. Cabin build costs $10,000. Required compliance costs $12,000. They say process. They mean freedom is allowed only if it's pre-approved. The irony is thick. Alberta positions itself as Canada's libertarian holdout, the place where rugged individualism still means something. But the regulatory architecture tells a different story. Every off-grid build requires the same gatekeepers, the same inspectors, the same revenue stream back to municipal coffers. Different rhetoric, same chokehold. What makes Alberta's system particularly effective is Safety Codes Council centralization. Every inspection, every permit, every approval flows through a single provincial framework, which sounds efficient until you realize it means there's no local discretion, no room for common sense exceptions. The inspector isn't evaluating your cabin, he's checking boxes on a provincial form. And the boxes were designed for suburban housing developments, not off-grid homesteads. You're being measured against standards that have nothing to do with your situation, cookie-cutter regulations for cookie-cutter outcomes. And if you think rural Alberta is strict, Nova Scotia operates even more quietly. Nova Scotia is friendly, but the Nova Scotia Building Code regulations aren't. Septic approval is mandatory. Engineered structural plans are often required. Well placement is heavily regulated. In 2019, a Cape Breton family was forced to stop construction until they hired engineers for septic plus structural compliance. Engineered septic, $15,000 to $28,000. Structural engineer letter, $800 to $2,000. Permit fees, $1,200. Total compliance, around $20,000. Value of DIY building, around $14,000. They say uniform standards, they mean owner-builders don't fit the model. What makes Nova Scotia particularly insidious is the friendliness of the process. Inspectors are polite, municipal staff are helpful, but the outcome is identical. Your cabin sits empty while you scramble for engineering stamps you can't afford. By the time you realize the system isn't designed to accommodate you, you've already spent everything. Nova Scotia also enforces setback requirements that make off-grid water systems nearly impossible on smaller lots. Your well must be 30 meters from any contamination source. Your septic field must be 15 meters from the well. Property lines count as contamination sources in some townships. So, if you bought a 1-acre lot, the geometry might not work. You need engineered drawings just to prove the distances are adequate. And if they're not, you need a variance, public hearing. $800 in application fees, 4 to 6 months to schedule. By the time you get approval, it's November, and you can't pour footings until spring. Ontario, 2022, a family installs $18,000 worth of solar. Perfectly safe, perfectly functional. But ESA inspectors refuse certification because they lack engineered documentation plus grid tie capability. Township says, without ESA certification, the dwelling cannot be legally occupied. Solar system, $18,000, grid connection, $27,000, total, $45,000. Rural average income around $38,000. They say reliable supply. They mean pay Hydro 1 or get out. This is where the system reveals itself most clearly. The solar works. The batteries hold charge. The lights turn on. But none of that matters because certification requires integration with a grid the homeowner explicitly didn't want. Translation: autonomy is allowed only when it reinforces utility revenue. The ESA certification process requires 3 inspections: rough-in, service connection, and final. Each costs $200 minimum, but the service connection inspection assumes you're connecting to utility power. If you're not, the inspection category doesn't exist in their system. The inspector shows up, sees your solar array and battery bank, and says, "I don't have a checklist for this. He's not being difficult." He literally doesn't have the paperwork. You need a professional engineer to write a custom compliance letter stating your system meets equivalent safety standards. That letter costs $1,500 to $3,000 for a cabin that already works, and the fines get worse. Alberta, 2021. A couple builds an off-grid cabin on private land. They apply for permits after framing. County denies permits, issues escalating fines, and orders demolition. Nothing was unsafe. It was just unapproved. Cabin cost $19,000. Required upgrades, $62,000. Total loss, catastrophic. They say compliance path. They mean, we'll bleed you out. This is the enforcement mechanism most people don't see until it's too late. The fines start small. $200, $500, then they escalate $1,500, $5,000. At some point, the county threatens a lien on your property. You can't sell, you can't refinance, you're trapped holding a structure you can't legally occupy and can't afford to bring into compliance. Here's how the escalation works. First notice is a warning. You have 30 days to apply for permits. Second notice adds $200. Third notice is $500. Fourth notice is $1,500. After that, it's $5,000 per month until you comply or they place a lien and force a sale. The Parkland County couple reached $12,000 in fines before they borrowed money from family. But by then, the county wanted engineered drawings for the existing structure. Another $8,000. They sold the land at a loss and moved into a rental. The county got its compliance, the couple got bankruptcy. Quebec, 2019 through 2022. A homeowner has a functioning well, clean water, no contamination, but the municipality extends a water line and mandates connection. Cost? $14,000 plus $900 yearly for a service they didn't need. They say public health, they mean pay into the system. This is perhaps the most transparent example of revenue protection disguised as safety regulation. The well worked, the water tested clean. But once municipal infrastructure reaches your road, you're required to connect regardless of need. It's not about your health. It's about justifying the infrastructure bond the municipality floated to extend that line. The mandatory connection bylaw works like this. When municipal water reaches within 60 meters of your property line, you have 18 months to connect. Connection fee covers running the service line from the main to your house. $14,000 average, but it can reach $25,000 if your house sits far from the road. Then you pay annual service fees whether you use the water or not, $900 minimum. And you're still required to maintain your well as backup because the municipality disclaims liability for service interruptions. So now you're paying for 2 water systems. You're, well, which worked fine, and their connection, which you didn't want. Failure to connect results in fines starting at $500 and escalating to property liens. And this pattern repeats across every province. 5 provinces, 5 ideologies, same outcome. Ontario runs on permits. BC runs on sustainability compliance. Quebec enforces through licensed trades. Alberta centralizes via safety codes. Nova Scotia engineers everything. Different language, same mechanism. Makes self-reliance financially impossible. Utilities want revenue. Municipalities want fees. Engineers want billable hours. Inspectors want job security. And provinces want control. You didn't fail the system. The system was designed to fail you. The regulatory complexity isn't accidental, it's architectural. Every code amendment, every new inspection requirement, every engineered stamp adds another gatekeeper between you and the autonomy you thought land ownership guaranteed. Look at the pattern. When Ontario requires ESA certification, they're checking if your solar panels integrate with utility infrastructure. When BC requires step code compliance, they're measuring if your cabin fits their computer model. When Quebec requires licensed electricians, they're verifying you paid union rates. When Alberta requires master electrician sign-off, they're protecting trade certification. When Nova Scotia requires engineered septic, they're generating billable hours. Every regulation protects someone's revenue. Every inspection justifies someone's salary. Every permit feeds someone's budget. The genius is that each requirement sounds reasonable in isolation. Of course, electrical work should be safe. Of course, septic systems should protect groundwater. But taken together, the requirements create an impossible financial barrier that has nothing to do with safety and everything to do with control. Remember the beginning? You standing on your land believing freedom meant privacy. Now the truth. Freedom is conditional, and the conditions get stricter every year. Nobody has to outlaw off-grid living. They just make it too expensive to comply. The inspector who delivered that first stop work order will be back. For your final inspection, for your occupancy permit, for your 3-year septic recertification, for your 5-year electrical review. The permits never end. The fees never stop, because you don't own land in Canada. You lease the right to occupy it from a provincial regulatory framework that can revoke your permission anytime you fail to pay the gatekeeper fees. They'll keep you plugged in whether you want to be or not.